This is a story from a Native American tribe that we call the Cherokee, about a young boy who once was given a very beautiful drum, and when his best friend saw it, he wanted to play it. And the boy felt very torn about this, and he didn't really want to share his present, so he angrily said, "No, you can't." And his friend ran away. And he sat down to think about this dilemma, about how he had hurt his friend, but how his drum was very precious. So he decided to talk to his grandfather about it. His grandfather said, "I often feel that there are two wolves fighting inside me. One is mean and greedy and arrogant, always wanting to get what it wants. The other is peaceful, open, and generous. And all the time, those two wolves are struggling." And he said to the young man, "You also have the same two wolves inside you." And the boy asked, "Which one will win?" And the grandfather replied, "The one you feed, the one you nourish." Today's gospel is about religious practice. We're talking about hand-washing rituals, and what Jesus is saying about any kind of religious practice, including what we're doing here, is it really has to be not just performance, it has to be about the heart. And the heart that Jesus is talking about is one that honors God, a heart that's warm and open and generous. The second reading, James says, real religion is about being generous to those in need. He talks about orphans and widows, which when that occurs, when those two things are coupled together in the scripture, it always refers to people who are vulnerable and in need. So how do you grow that heart? How will you grow that heart at the beginning of this year that is warm and open and generous and compassionate? How do you feed that wolf and not the greedy wolf? Certainly, I think the traditional practices that we have in our Catholic faith are very important. So our practice of Sunday Mass, of which you are giving great witness today, our practice of reconciliation, our practice of reading the scripture or having faith sharing or scripture study, and certainly some kind of regular prayer, and certainly acts of service and kindness. And it's true, you can do all those things, but sometimes, again, if we do them only in kind of an external performance kind of way, they don't really generate much kindness or generosity. I want to talk about two practices, though, today that I want to recommend to you as part of your spiritual life here at Butler that we need in this time of our life in our country and in the world. The first one is the practice of silence. A silence where we have shut down the mind for a while. We've shut down all that thinking that we do all day long, all those judgments we make, all those evaluations that we make, all those comparisons that we make about other people. I've just finished a book called How God Changes Your Brain by Dr. Andrew Newberg and Mark Waldman. They both work at the University of Pennsylvania. They do research in the field of neurology and its connection to spirituality. The title is a little misleading because, again, you might think that what he's trying to document is how God messes with your brain, but that's not what he's trying to research. What he's trying to research is what happens to your mind when you meditate? What happens to your mind when you think about God? What happens to your mind, your brain, when you are engaged in a ritual? A couple things to remember about the human brain. There's one part of our brain that's the oldest part, and we share that with reptiles. That part of the brain is self-protective. Often the greedy wolf. It's often, that part of your brain is always ready to defend itself, can be angry and hostile like a reptile. There's a newer part to our brain in the human development that tends to want to cooperate with people, wants to, can somehow feel what other people feel, can be compassionate. And that part of the brain also subdues that ancient reptilian brain that we have. And when you meditate, when you are quiet, and the research has been showing this for 60 years, by the way, it's not new to Newberg. When you meditate, when you are quiet, when you are engaged in ritual, the newer part of the brain is stimulated. And for which reason he says that ultimately his book is about compassion. But one of the chief ways in which you nourish that part of your brain is through quiet and meditation. In other words, what his research shows is that those two wolves of that ancient Cherokee story live right up here and back here. How much we need some silence. He says 12 minutes a day. Because that silence feeds our relationship with God, it feeds our ability to cooperate, it feeds our generosity and our compassion. We spend, as Ann said, so much time being involved in getting things done and accomplishing things. We spend a lot of our day performing, making the grade, being evaluated, judging ourselves and others. And when you do that all day long, it's pretty easy to feed that greedy wolf. Pretty easy to feed the anger. So 10 minutes of silence a day. Really want you to think about that. It's not magic, it won't make you perfect. But it is a very time-honored way in every single religion, including Christianity, as a way of touching the reality of God. The second practice that I want to suggest is usually not on anybody's list of religious practice, but I think very important for our time, and that is the practice of meaningful conversation. Meaningful conversation. Think about how many conversations you have during the day. How many conversations on Facebook or Twitter or wherever else it is that you're having conversations. And this is not a slam against Twitter or Facebook or any of that kind of thing. But most often you don't find meaningful conversation. In his book, What God Does to Your Brain, How God Changes Your Brain, he has a list of 8 best practices to stimulate your brain. The second best way is meaningful dialogue with someone else. Not a monologue, not what can I get from you, not what you can do for me, not about the weather, not about how tired I am, or how rotten somebody else is, or any kind of gossip. It's not about conversation that's hostile or angry. In fact, his research shows that angry conversation tends to damage the brain. Meaningful conversation is face-to-face. There's no substitute for that. Meaningful conversation about your life and about things that are important to you and what you believe and what you struggle with and how that interacts with that other person, what they believe and what they struggle with. Conversation where you don't have to be self-protective. Conversation where you don't have to be in performance. Conversation where, again, it's not about being evaluated about how good you are. Try to have one meaningful conversation a day. That's one of my goals for the Butler Catholic community, to create venues where we can have meaningful conversations about faith and life, whether that be in faith sharing groups or retreats or reconciliation or just a walk along the canal or any number of ways in which we can be creative to do that. Finally, I want to tell you one last thing about Dr. Newberg. He's not a believer, although he's one of the most positive authors about religion and faith that I've ever seen. You might want to think about this. He's not a believer, but in his research about the 8 best ways to stimulate your brain, the very best way to stimulate your brain, according to his research, is faith. So you might want to think about how this agnostic can tell us that. I believe in his research. I believe his research says some things that our tradition has been saying for a long time. I believe in the story about the 2 wolves. I know that they both live in me. I believe in the reptile part of my brain. I can experience that as well as anybody. But I also believe in that other part that can be compassionate and generous. And I want to be able to feed that. And I want you to be able to feed yours.